We know that there are going to be running back injuries every single year, and staying ahead of our league mates by knowing which handcuffs are the guys to target, maybe in your drafts or even in waivers early in the season, can make us that much more successful when it matters most. So we're gonna break it down team by team, look at the starters and then the next two running backs on the depth chart, and then try to decide who are the biggest running back handcuffs to own in fantasy football. Headliner Nation, today we're going to be going through the depth charts of every single NFL team, and we're going to look at the starters and then try to figure out what running backs we need to own as their handcuffs this season. And I've got it broken down into several different categories to even let you know what type of league do you play in and which guy should you have based on that. This is the type of information you need when preparing for your fantasy drafts. But if you've got a draft coming up very soon, the best way to prepare is by getting our 2023 fantasy football draft guide, and you get instant access to it. So it doesn't even matter if you draft in 24 hours. If you buy it, you're going to get it as soon as you access it through your email. And we've been updating this thing all off season, and we'll continue to do so until kickoff in week 1, with almost 300 exclusive videos that you can't find here on YouTube and other exclusive information that can't be found anywhere in the fantasy industry. This is one of the best bargains that you can get to help you win your fantasy league this season. So make sure you hit that link in the description down below and get yours ordered right now so we can get ready to bring home some fantasy championships. Now, before I start breaking down all the depth charts, let me explain to you the different categories we have for these handcuffs. The first one is potential standalone value. That means that this running back handcuff could be a guy that could be like a weekly flex start no matter what. Those are the type of guys that might have touchdown upside every single game this season. Some guys might fall into my PPR or best ball only category, and those are the guys that might get a decent amount of passing work. So in PPR leagues, that could end up helping you out. Or in best ball leagues, those are guys that in regular redraft, you might not be able to depend on them to be consistent fantasy producers. But in best ball leagues, if they have a big week, they're automatically going to be in our lineup anyway, so those could be guys that help us in that format. There's going to be some guys that we should only be drafting in deeper leagues. So if you're somebody that plays in like a 14 or 16 team league, these are the guys that you might want to spend a late round pick on, because at some point in time, you might be able to use them. Even if looking at it right now, their value for especially like a shallow league isn't what we would want. Then there's going to be the guys that I list as handcuff only, and these are the players that we are drafting to back up another starter that we have drafted for our team. Now, there's a lot of people that are going to argue you don't draft your own handcuffs, and I don't agree with it, and I have my own argument against that, but that's a different story for a different day. In this instance, these might be the guys that if we have a little bit of a larger roster, even if it's a 12-man or a 10-man league or whatever it may be, if we have a little bit of a larger roster and more bench spots, this is the handcuff that we would want to own in case something happens to our starter. Now let's kick it off. We're going to start out in the NFC East with the Buffalo Bills and James Cook. I definitely like James Cook this season. I think he's in for a breakout year. But the guy behind him, Damian Harris, currently listed as the RB2, really for me does have some standalone value, and we'll see kind of what happens as the season gets started. But Damian Harris definitely is a guy that could be a little bit of a goal line vulture, and if that happens, he's somebody that we could count on for potential touchdown upside every single week. So maybe not a solidified starter for us, but maybe a flex if we're looking for something. And then Latavius Murray, who is currently the RB3 listed, we're not really interested in him at this point in time, because if something were to happen to James Cook, it will be Damian Harris, and we likely will see some Latavius Murray, but not enough to make him fantasy viable. Now, the Miami Dolphins are apparently pursuing or thinking about pursuing Jonathan Taylor, but as of this recording, he's not a part of that team. So Raheem Mostert right now is considered the starter. Now, right behind him is Jeff Wilson. This is a guy that I would take a look at really in deeper leagues only. And that's because Devon Achane right behind him probably is going to be the guy that is going to see the highest uptick in fantasy value as the season goes on. Now, Devon Achane is listed as standalone value for me because I think he's going to be the highest rising guy in terms of fantasy value in this offense, and he could end up taking over the starter role within the first few weeks of the season. Now, nothing guaranteed, and I do think it would take an injury to Raheem Mostert or just super poor production for that to happen. But as I've talked about a lot this season, I also think Achane could move out to the slot and be a little bit more of a receiving threat than what we might see on the ground. But he's definitely a guy that we could look at as potential standalone value pretty soon. Then for the Patriots, people continue to panic over Ramondre Stevenson and Ezekiel Elliott being added to the fold. And I do think Elliott potentially has some standalone value. He's going to do some of the short yardage situation and goal line situations that Ramondre Stevenson wasn't as successful in last year. Now, Ramondre Stevenson is still a low end running back one for me because Zeke Elliott isn't going to see a ton of volume. Now, the standalone value from Elliott is going to be in those situations where we think New England could get out to a big lead, so we see a little bit more Elliott, or in those situations where we think he's going to score a touchdown. That's really the only place that I like him at. Now, in best ball leagues, just keep Ty Montgomery on your radar, especially if something were to happen to either of these guys, because Ty Montgomery is a true receiving specialist. If anything were to happen to Elliott or Ramondre Stevenson, we could end up seeing some Ty Montgomery in the pass game. And if that were to happen, there could be quite a few checkdowns to him. Now, again, this is not a guy that is fantasy relevant or going to be consistent. But in those best ball leagues where you have a little bit larger rosters and you're just looking to throw darts at some running backs at the end of your draft, you never know what could happen with Ty Montgomery if he were to get some of that passing work. Now, for the New York Jets, I've got Dalvin Cook listed as standalone value because him and Breece Hall are really going to see a 50-50 split in this backfield. They're both going to have fantasy relevance. Dalvin Cook probably going to be leaned on a little bit more. I'm not surprised that he's listed as the RB2 right now on the depth charts, but probably within the first couple of weeks of the season, you'll see him be the RB1. I expect him to out-touch Breece Hall to begin the year. So for which one of these guys are you going with? It's really just whoever you want at that point. Now for Michael Carter, we're not interested in him because if Breece Hall were to miss significant time, then Dalvin Cook is going to be the guy. If Dalvin Cook were to miss time, then Breece Hall is going to be the guy, with Michael Carter getting a few touches here or there. The only way Michael Carter becomes relevant is if something happens to Hall and Cook both. All right, let's head to the AFC North, starting with the Baltimore Ravens, and Gus the Bus Edwards is going to have standalone value. There's been different reports and things from J.K. Dobbins this offseason. Was slightly holding out, maybe wasn't as healthy as we thought. I don't know. Upset with his contract. At this point, who knows what's going on with the running backs in this league. But for J.K. Dobbins, he'll be listed as the starter, and he is the guy that you would want to own in Baltimore. But we've seen Gus Bus absolutely go crazy as well. We know he's an efficiency monster, and he's a guy that could potentially end up having standalone value if this backfield goes to a true 50-50 split. And then if something were to happen to J.K. Dobbins, then Gus Edwards would absolutely be the guy. For the Cincinnati Bengals, I'm actually really interested in the couple of guys that are listed behind Joe Mixon. Now, Joe Mixon is making his way through his legal troubles and really coming out the other side without a whole lot of repercussions. So he's probably still going to be the guy. He took a little bit of a pay cut. He's staying in Cincinnati. He's the running back to own. He's going to be on the field the majority of the touches. Keep an eye on Chris Evans, though, because this is a guy that is a true receiving threat out of the backfield. He is a guy that moved to running back at Michigan after playing a lot of wide receiver. He's a guy that knows how to run his routes. And in best ball leagues, if something were to happen with Mixon who misses some time, or if they're just not giving him the type of production in the passing game that they would want, Chris Evans would be the guy that is likely going to get all those targets. Now, Chase Brown is not a guy that I expect to take any touches away from Joe Mixon. But he is a guy that I would be interested in if I'm in a deeper league. Because if something were to happen to Joe Mixon and he were to miss time, Chase Brown to me would be the guy that would take over, and Chris Evans would stay in his pass catching role. Meaning if we're looking for the touches on the ground, Chase Brown would be that guy. Maybe not as much upside as Joe Mixon, because Mixon's going to be getting a lot of the touches on the ground and through the air, but then you're going to see that split with Chris Evans. So keep an eye on Chase Brown in those deeper leagues, 14, 16 teams, because he would definitely be the guy to own if Joe Mixon were to go down. For the Cleveland Browns, it's Nick Chubb or bust. Now, I don't have either of the guys listed behind him in any specific category, because if Nick Chubb were to go down and miss any time, you're probably looking at like a true split. There's really no telling right now who would be the actual backup to Nick Chubb if something were to happen. So for me, this is a situation with the Cleveland Browns where we're heavily invested in Nick Chubb. This is a guy that has top 5 running back potential this year, and definitely top number 1 overall potential if he gets the passing work that we're thinking he could. But again, if something happens to him, I don't really know. Nobody really stands out. There are some people out there who like Felton and think he would be a good pass catching option, and that's true, but I don't know who would be the guy to own. So as of right now, we're drafting Nick Chubb, and I'm not really backing him up with anybody else on that roster. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, Najee Harris is going to be the starter, but Jaylen Warren is definitely a guy that you want to handcuff with him. Jaylen Warren last season was really, really good from an efficiency standpoint. He's got a lot of burst and big playability, and Pittsburgh is starting to notice that. I talked about Jaylen Warren in one of my videos the other day. So for Jaylen Warren, he is a guy that if I own Najee Harris, if I've got enough roster space, I'm okay backing up Harris with Jaylen Warren, because if Najee Harris shows the same lack of production in terms of his efficiency that we have seen his first 2 years in the league, don't be surprised in some of those situations where we see the Pittsburgh Steelers maybe playing from behind if Jaylen Warren isn't on the field a little bit more often. I also think Jaylen Warren could be used in the pass catching game a little bit more too. So if something were to happen to Najee Harris, we absolutely have to have Jaylen Warren in his spot. And Jaylen Warren would likely become the number 1 priority waiver ad that week, and we do not want to leave it up to chance and our league mates potentially grabbing him. Heading over to the AFC South for the Houston Texans, we know Dameon Pierce is going to be that dude. But if you play in a deeper league, don't forget about Devin Singletary. One thing that we saw with Dameon Pierce last year, and it was a big concern for us, is that he was going to break down as the season went on. He is not a guy that had a really big workload while in college. And we saw that the more work he got last season, the more he started to break down. And we got to the end of the year, he ended up missing a lot of time. And I believe that's why the Texans decided to add Devin Singletary, because they want to get some of those touches over to Singletary and away from Pierce so he doesn't break down as easy. Now, are we talking about a true 50-50 split? Absolutely not. But we definitely could be looking at like a 60-40 split, with Dameon Pierce having the larger upside, and then Devin Singletary maybe being a guy that we see get on the field a little bit more often than we would like. But in deeper leagues, I think it's really good to kind of keep him on our radar, especially given as well as he played while he was in Buffalo. For the Indianapolis Colts, it really, it hurts deep in my chest to list Zach Moss, who is one of the NFL's worst running backs, is standalone value. But unfortunately, we have to right now because we don't know what's going on with Jonathan Taylor. He was basically approved by the Colts to seek a trade. There's teams that are interested in him. Who knows if those teams send a running back over to the Colts? But if the Colts don't end up getting a running back in return, Zach Moss is probably going to be the starter. So as of right now, he's got standalone value. Now, if Jonathan Taylor comes back, I'm going to nix that one. We're not going to draft Zach Moss. But keep it on your radar. The closer we get to the season without any resolution to this Jonathan Taylor situation is really kind of good. But if you're drafting right now, it might not hurt to use one of your last picks on Zach Moss. And then if something were to happen, then at that point, you've got the starter and we can kind of go from there. For the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'm not worried about what Tank Bigsby is going to take away from Travis Etienne, but I also acknowledge the fact that Tank Bigsby is better in certain areas of the game than what Travis Etienne was last year. And those certain areas of the game are going to be at the goal line, where Tank Bigsby could be a guy that scores a decent amount of touchdowns. Now, he doesn't have the home run potential that Travis Etienne has, and that's why I fully believe Travis Etienne is going to stay the starter. One of the best efficiency running backs in all of football last year, and did a really great job with his big play ability. Tank Bigsby, not really the same type of gameplay, and that's fine. In this offense, we know they're going to be scoring a lot, or at least getting towards the goal line a lot, and that could give Tank Bigsby quite a few opportunities to punch one in here and there. And because of that, he could have some standalone value by himself. For the Tennessee Titans, if you draft Derrick Henry, you have to have Tyjae Spears on your roster. He's looked really, really good so far in the preseason, and he was a guy that I like for the most part coming out of college. Now, I don't think he's a true workhorse running back, and I don't think that he is a guy that would be the dude if something were to happen to Derrick Henry. He would get, a majority of the touches, but somebody would back him up. But if you have Derrick Henry, Spears would be the next guy up, and we know with Henry, given the amount of workload he has had over the last few years, anything could be possible. So definitely back up Derrick Henry with Spears, because if Henry goes down, you're going to have some big playability with that home run threat of Spears out of the backfield. Let's finish up the AFC and we'll head out west, starting with the Denver Broncos. And it's crazy to think that Javonte Williams is currently listed as the starter, given the fact that when he got hurt last season, his leg was hanging by a single ligament. But it looks like that he's coming back ready to get those touches. He's going full bore in training camp right now, and Denver's acting like he's going to have a decent workload to start. Now, given the fact that we know guys coming back from injury can underperform and have other injury issues, Samaje Perine is going to have stand-alone value. Now, the other day I included Javonte Williams in one of my videos, and I said given his ADP still, I'm willing to take a shot on him, especially if I end up taking him as like my RB4 or something like that. And that thought process still holds true to me. I'm not telling you to go draft Javonte Williams as like your running back too, and I'm not telling you that he's going to win you a league, and I'm certainly not telling you that he's going to give you 17 fully healthy games this season. But it's extremely encouraging to see that he's already feeling this good, and if that is the case, the guy was an absolute beast heading into last season, and I'm willing to take a shot on him a little bit later on in my drafts as long as my ADP doesn't go too high. Now, with that being said, Samaje Perine is a guy that everyone should be looking to draft, whether you have Javonte Williams or not. Because again, he's going to be a guy that probably is going to have standalone value, and we'll see at least, he could see 60 to 70% of the touches to start the season, and maybe as Javonte Williams gets through and feels better, we see that even out to maybe 50-50, or then go over to Javonte Williams a little bit more. But for right now, we'll just keep an eye on that situation heading into week one, continue to draft both of these guys, and one of them by the end of the season will end up being the main back. The Kansas City Chiefs will continue to have Isaiah Pacheco listed as the starter, but Jerick McKinnon to me is a PPR or best ball guy. He's probably still going to see a decent amount of workload in the passing game. Now, is he going to be the fantasy winner that we saw towards the end of last season where the dude was scoring like every single week? Probably not. But in a best ball league, definitely see him having some big games where he's going to be inserted into your lineup as a potential top 12 option. And in PPR leagues, definitely a guy where if you're dealing with injuries, bye weeks, or you need some sort of a fill-in, you could utilize him in a PPR league as like a flex and probably end up getting through the week okay. Now, I do have Clyde Edwards-Helaire listed as deep leagues only. For those of you that play out there in 14, 16-man leagues, I would take a look at CEH, because with this guy, if something were to happen to Isaiah Pacheco, who is already coming back from offseason surgery, if he were to miss any time, CEH is probably the starter with Jerick McKinnon retaining his role. So CEH is the guy that would kind of hop up into there. Now, in terms of being a handcuff only and deep league only, if you're wondering what the difference is, well, if he were a handcuff only, then I would say if you own Isaiah Pacheco, then you need to draft CEH regardless of the league size that you play in. I don't really feel like that is the case because, again, yeah, he might take over Pacheco's role if Pacheco goes down, but because Jerick McKinnon is likely not to see any change in his pass catching role, I'm not as excited about CEH. He's only a guy that I'm looking at in deeper leagues where you're going to have the roster space that if you're filling out your bench, you could probably take a look at this guy super late because there's not going to be a ton of options anyway. Now, Josh Jacobs still has not reported to the Las Vegas Raiders, and there's still no guarantee that he will be there by week 1. So we still don't know what's going to happen. But Zamir White has been the guy in the preseason so far, and for me, I'm going to put him as standalone value because Josh Jacobs isn't there. We don't know for sure when he will show up. Even if he were to show up like right before week 1, who's to say he actually plays in week 1? Maybe he needs a couple of weeks to get his legs under him and get himself into football shape. Those are concerns that I have. Now, if Josh Jacobs shows up like this week, then maybe he's got enough time and we don't really worry about Zamir White. If Josh Jacobs were to start week 1, then I'm not worried about Zamir White anyway. So just know that if Josh Jacobs is in line for a full workload no matter what, then I'm not interested in Zamir White. I am only interested in Zamir White if Josh Jacobs for some reason does not show up before kickoff of week 1. For the Los Angeles Chargers, it's Austin Eckler or bust, because if something were to happen to Austin Eckler, there's no telling who the next guy up is going to be. Now, Joshua Kelly and Isaiah Spiller are listed here, but neither of them can replace what Austin Eckler does, and neither of them are guys that, even if Austin Eckler were to go down, that I'd be running to grab, because I don't think either of them present any type of upside. So for the Chargers, we're drafting Austin Eckler, but for his backups, I'm just leaving all of them on the waivers, and if something were to happen to Austin Eckler, then we'll talk about potentially adding them at that time, because they're not going to bring the type of waiver priority ad that some of these other handcuffs would. All right, now we're going to head on over to the NFC East, start with the Dallas Cowboys, and Tony Pollard, coming off a breakout season, is the guy to own in Dallas. I mean, he is going to be the RB1 without a whole lot of competition behind him. But Deuce Vaughn has looked excellent this preseason. And I could have listed Deuce Vaughn a couple of different ways. Definitely could have listed him in like a PPR best ball type of league. But honestly, I'm going to put him as a handcuff to own behind Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is coming back from an injury last season that the Dallas Cowboys may need to continue to just work him back a little bit slowly and not send him out there and give him 30 touches a game right off the bat. And the Cowboys have talked about trying to commit back to the run a little bit more than what they have in the past, which is super weird because how have you not been committed to the run with Pollard and Zeke? But that's whatever at this point. So for Deuce Vaughn, I'm going to list him as a handcuff to own along with Tony Pollard. If you're in best ball leagues, I also would take a look at him there. And even in PPR leagues, I would also take a look at him. Now, if Tony Pollard were to go down with an injury at that point, things would get a little bit more interesting because I don't think Deuce Vaughn would take on an accelerated type of role. He would probably keep the role that he already has, but he could see a little bit increased volume on the ground. Still probably not more than 50% of the running back snaps, though. The New York Giants, I'm only really buying into Saquon Barkley. The options behind him are not anybody that I'm looking to grab and own really in any type of format. If Barkley were to go down, Matt Breida right now is kind of listed as that backup running back, but I know Eric Gray could potentially push him for time. You know, really at this point, we're kind of just have to wait and see what happens because it could really be anybody this season if Saquon Barkley were to go down. So as of right now, no one's going to have any type of standalone or PPR volume behind him because he's going to get probably 80% of the touches. If something were to happen to him, then we'll have to reevaluate for the waivers that week. The Philadelphia Eagles may be one of the worst backfields to try and figure out this season. Right now, DeAndre Swift is listed as the starter, but this could end up being a three-way battle in the backfield that no one is ever really able to figure out. So Swift, even if he is the starter right now, Kenneth Gainwell has been gaining a lot of traction over the last couple of weeks as being a really big handcuff and potentially maybe the guy if Swift and Penny either A, can't stay healthy, or B, don't showcase a lot of the talent that we've seen from them before. Now with Rashad Penny, he's a guy that I'm really kind of staying away from right now, unless it's like a best ball league. If it's a best ball league and you've drafted like DeAndre Swift, you really got to go for Penny as well. If you're in like a best ball league and he's like your RB5, I don't think that's really that big of an issue. You can stash him away on the bench, and if he hits in any certain game, that really works out well for you. But if you draft DeAndre Swift in any type of a normal redraft league, right now it seems like Kenneth Gainwell is the guy that's going to be right behind him. And if something were to happen to DeAndre Swift, Kenneth Gainwell may be the primary back. And because it's the Philadelphia Eagles with a great offensive line, more than likely it's going to be really hard to get Kenneth Gainwell if you don't already have him, if you're trying to go through, because he'll probably be the #1 priority that week. So if you have Swift, let's back him up with Gainwell, who's actually cheaper than Rashad Penny right now. Now, for the Washington Commanders, Brian Robinson has been the starter, but Antonio Gibson, he seems to have the Commanders a little bit more dedicated to using him as a pass catcher this season. It just feels like since his rookie year, that the Commanders really haven't been dedicated to him or really haven't trusted him in any type of role. So for this year, if they really do plan on using him as a pass catcher, out of the backfield, in the slot, moving him around and making him a weapon in this offense, it does a lot of good for him and people who draft him. That's why he has standalone value. Definitely in PPR leagues and even half PPR leagues. He could see enough targets in any given week that if he scores, he should more than be able to outdo anybody else that you would want to put in your flex. In the NFC North for the Chicago Bears, I really do believe that they are going to let Khalil Herbert take the hold of this backfield, barring any injuries and barring any horrific starts to the season. But Dante Foreman and Roschon Johnson are going to be right behind him, ready to take some of those touches if he just can't get the job done. Now, Dante Foreman for me is a guy that really I'm taking a look at in deeper leagues, because even though he's listed as the RB2 right now, I believe it's Roschon Johnson who is really the handcuff to own behind Khalil Herbert. And if I'm looking to invest in the Bears backfield and redraft leagues, I want to invest in both Herbert and Roschon Johnson, because this is going to happen one or two ways. First off, looking at the landscape of the draft, both of these guys are going super late. So if you have to give up on one or both of them, it's not going to end up being something that greatly hurts your roster. But the first way things work out here is that Khalil Herbert dominates, plays really, really well, shows that insane efficiency that he had last year. Roschon Johnson just doesn't take the job away from him. Or Khalil Herbert ends up busting to begin the season and Johnson ends up taking over and you end up dropping Herbert anyway. So really, if I'm you, because of how late these guys are going, those are the two that I want. And then if you're in a super deep league, like 14 or 16 teams, Dante Foreman is also a guy that we should be taking a look at. For the Detroit Lions, it was a pretty big surprise for everybody this offseason when they decided to let Jamal Williams walk and they went with David Montgomery instead in free agency. But I also speak for everybody when I say drafting Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round was probably a bigger surprise than that. David Montgomery could see anywhere from 225 to 250 carries on the ground this season. He's going to be the main back, and he's going to be heavily utilized on the ground, and he's going to score some rushing touchdowns as well. For Jahmyr Gibbs, though, he's going to have standalone value, and it's crazy how fast Jahmyr Gibbs is coming off draft boards compared to David Montgomery. David Montgomery is going to have standalone value, and honestly, the way they're being drafted, Jahmyr Gibbs should be listed as the 1 and David Montgomery as the 2. But both of these guys can be drafted. They can be drafted by the same team. They can be drafted by different teams. Both of these guys should end up giving you some sort of fantasy value. Now, the one thing I will caution you to, maybe not RB2 value, maybe more like flex value, because I do think that they could see some up and down weeks given how many pass catchers they have there. For the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon are both going to have a big role in this offense. The change from Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love isn't going to be a quick or easy one. So Aaron Jones' ability in the passing game is really going to be needed to help this offense move the ball down the field. And he's still going to see plenty of touches on the ground, and giving on how big of a home run threat he is, the dude can score from anywhere. For A.J. Dillon, it's all going to be about, can he get over 215 carries on the ground, and if he can he score around 8 touchdowns? If he can do that, absolutely hammers the standalone value. These guys can both be drafted together, though. Kind of the same thing with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. You can either draft them separately or you can draft them together, and you might be able to even utilize some of them together at the same time. But for some reason, if one or the other were to be hurt, that's just going to lead to a crazy increased workload for the other. For the Minnesota Vikings, Alexander Mattison is going to be the guy. And a lot of people were looking towards McBride before Ty Chandler started to have a pretty big preseason here. So as of right now, to me, Ty Chandler is going to be the handcuff to Alexander Mattison. Now, if you're drafting Alexander Mattison, Ty Chandler would be like a last round draft pick for you. But he's definitely the handcuff to own, because I believe if Mattison were to go down, Ty Chandler would end up becoming the starter there. I don't expect any running backs to have any type of a big workload in the passing game, so really we're just going to be looking at what they can do on the ground, which might leave them with an okay floor but a really low ceiling each week. Down to the NFC South, starting with the Atlanta Falcons, and we know Bijan Robinson is a first-round pick. But Tyler Algier needs to be owned in every single fantasy league this season. If not just for the fact that he's a backup and one of the best running offenses in all of football. The dude was great last year with absolute insane efficiency and may have been a borderline top 12 running back this year if they had not drafted Bijan. So absolutely, you got to draft this guy. Even if you draft Bijan, draft Tyler Algier as well. Because if anything happens to Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier is going to be the #1 waiver pickup all across football. Now, he's the only guy in this offense that I would really want to own. Now, if you're in a best ball league, you could draft Cordarrelle Patterson, but in any type of a redraft league or a league where you have to just set standardized rosters, no, there's no way you're going to figure out what week Cordarrelle Patterson is going to do anything. So best ball leagues is the only area that I would be interested in for him. The Carolina Panthers, Miles Sanders will be the starting running back and should have a pretty good season, but sitting behind him, Chuba Hubbard in best ball drafts might be a decent late round stash. If there's going to be anybody that's going to work out of the backfield in a pass catching role this year, I believe it would be Hubbard over Miles Sanders. And that's something that we'll have to see play out. There's not really a whole lot of evidence to suggest that, but I know they've kept Hubbard around this long, and he is a guy that has pretty decent hands out of the backfield, already knows the playbook, and with the way Bryce Young has kind of started the preseason, he's going to need somebody safe just to kind of dump that ball off to. So in best ball leagues, being able to have Chuba Hubbard, where who knows, maybe he gets 8 targets in a week and catches 6 of them and goes for 60 yards and a touchdown, he's going to end up being pushed up into your lineup. So keep an eye on him. Since the New Orleans Saints are going to be missing Alvin Kamara for the first 3 weeks of the season, both Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller are going to have some standalone value to start. Now, the one guy that I think carries on that value, even when Kamara comes back, is going to be Jamal Williams. I think him and Kamara can both be drafted and potentially both be utilized. Kendre Miller, for me, is only a guy that I'm drafting in like super deep leagues, 14 or 16 team leagues, or for those of you that might draft him right now just to utilize him for the first 3 weeks of the season while we see Alvin Kamara suspended. Maybe that's a flex option for you, but in like 12 team leagues, there just isn't enough there for me. And like best ball and PPR leagues, there's just not enough upside there for me to own him anyways. So it's only going to be deeper leagues with him. And the main reason why is because the Saints seem to like him. I am not in love with the Tampa Bay backfield. I'm not a huge fan of Rachaad White. And then after that, there's a lot of things that could change. In best ball and PPR leagues, I would take a look at Chase Edmonds because he is going to be the pass catcher in this backfield to start. So if Baker Mayfield is having trouble, if that offensive line does not hold up because of the changes that we're seeing with them, Chase Edmonds could see a lot of dump off passes. And besides that as well, if this team is down, more than likely that third down or hurry up offensive role is going to go to Chase Edmonds. So in PPR leagues, definitely keep an eye on him. Keyshawn Vaughn in deeper leagues, though, should also be owned because if anything were to happen to Rachaad White or he just isn't playing well, Keyshawn Vaughn is going to get an opportunity for more and more snaps. I mean, there is really potentially an option that if Rachaad White doesn't increase his efficiency from last year, that Keyshawn Vaughn ends up maybe unseating him at some point. Now, is that likely? Probably not. But in deeper leagues, I think it's a good idea to own his backup because once again, that is another guy that could become a top waiver priority ad if Rachaad White were to go down. Last but not least, the NFC West. And for the Arizona Cardinals, this offense, might be a disaster this year. So if you're drafting James Conner, that's fine. But if James Conner gets hurt, I don't know if I'm even going after any of the starters at that point. James Conner is the only guy that I'm going to trust. If you want to draft him, go for it. I'm not super excited for him. But then after that, there's nobody that has standalone value. And even if James Conner were to go down, I'm probably not wasting a waiver priority for the starting running back and potentially one of the worst offenses in all of football. For those of you drafting Christian McCaffrey, I think it's a really good idea for you to handcuff Elijah Mitchell right now. We know Elijah Mitchell can be really, really good in terms of his efficiency, but he's not going to get the type of volume needed to be just a standalone player. That's why I have him listed as a handcuff right now. Because if Christian McCaffrey misses time, which is definitely a possibility, Elijah Mitchell definitely would be the #1 waiver priority ad, and he definitely would be a start in any game that Christian McCaffrey misses. For those of you investing in Christian McCaffrey, make sure you protect that investment by also bringing in Elijah Mitchell, because then you're set at that point. If anything happens to McCaffrey, Mitchell's just going to be a push him in and start him right away, fella. Now for the Seattle Seahawks, Zach Charbonnet is a little bit more to handcuff than standalone value for me, but I do acknowledge the fact that Charbonnet is good enough that he could see some big plays that would make him some standalone value. Now, if you own Kenneth Walker, I would definitely take Zach Charbonnet a little bit later on, and it's for the same reason that I've mentioned in a lot of other instances as well. If anything happens to Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet is going to become the #1 most added waiver priority player, and he's going to be a top 12 running back right off the bat. So if you're drafting Kenneth Walker, it's a good idea to protect him with Zach Charbonnet. But for those of you that don't have Kenneth Walker, I still think it's a good idea to take a shot at Zach Charbonnet later in your draft, just to make sure that you do have that guy that at any point this season could step right in and be one of your top contributors. And finishing up with the Los Angeles Rams, you know, Cam Akers had a decent end to 2022. I acknowledge he looked good down the stretch. I still like Kyren Williams, though. So if you're going to be drafting Cam Akers, maybe taking a shot at Kyren Williams isn't that bad of an idea. Now, is he going to have standalone value? Absolutely not. And he's probably a little bit closer to, we don't even need this guy than we do need him. But because we know that Cam Akers didn't have all the burst in the world coming back from his Achilles last year, and because this run game probably isn't going to be the best with the offensive line, it's still something to keep an eye on. And who knows, you know, maybe with Kyren Williams, if Cam Akers misses a game, he becomes a startable player. Headliner Nation, there you have it. All 32 teams and their top 3 starters at the running back position. And what am I doing with the handcuffs? Who am I getting on the depth chart to put on my fantasy roster right now? If the video seemed a little weird for you all today, I apologize. I have been super sick. So if my energy seems down or I look sick, I'm not surprised. I even text Taylor and Jake and was like, hey, you're going to be able to tell in this video that I don't look well. So hopefully I can get some better sleep today, make myself, you know, get that energy back up and be here ready to roll for the beginning of the season for you, Headliner Nation. Hit that like button for me, subscribe if you're new here, and leave me a comment down below letting me know some of your favorite handcuffs that you're trying to draft this season, maybe a couple of under the radar guys as well. Peace out, Headliner Nation. Y'all stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.